Well, today's my birthday, and after yesterday's episode, I can really tell that I am truly a dinosaur, suffering from senior moments. I forgot to turn on my microphone yesterday and did a whole segment without having any concept of what I was doing or any thought that maybe I forgot to turn on my microphone. That's what happens when you get old, and it's also what happens when you spend your whole professional career with help and having people do things for you. The older I get, the more reliant I become on others, and the less capable I am of doing things myself. Anyway, my thing yesterday, and I'll redo that this week sometime, was about how we transitioned from different legal systems between the Johnson administration and the Nixon administration and some of the ramifications. What I'll develop here is a concept that we've gone from a common law system to a Napoleonic civil law system and what the ramifications of each are. But right now, let's talk about prison crowding and why we got prison crowding. And we have prison reform and defund the police and all this other kind of crazy shit going on out there, which doesn't make much sense if you don't know what you're changing. And you don't know what you're changing if you don't have a historical basis to realize what things were before you changed them. So let's take the idea of bond, or the concept of bond. Bond was a provision of the Magna Carta, 1,000-year-old now, that was designed to ensure people went to court. If they didn't go to court, they'd forfeit their bond. The purpose of the bond wasn't, at least under common law, wasn't to protect people or whatever. That was the concept of Napoleonic law. Napoleonic law had no presumption of innocence. If the magistrate or praetor or whoever was investigating thought you may have committed a crime there, we were entitled to hold you until they finished their investigation so you wouldn't escape in the meantime. Under common law, that was considered bad because the common law tradition and theory was you were presumed to be innocent, and if you were presumed to be innocent, how could they lock you up? And why would they lock you up if you were presumed to be innocent unless they thought you were guilty? And even if they had no evidence to think you were guilty, they could probably lock you up until they found evidence or manufactured enough. And that's pretty much proven out in the last 40 years of my law practice. They imprison people and keep them there and keep them away from their loved ones and their jobs, etc., until sooner or later they want to plead guilty just to get the proceedings over with. This overturns 1,000 years of precedent, and it happened under the Nixon regime. Up until that time, the concept of presumed innocent held forever. Now they advise you of your rights under what they called the Miranda rule, that you're presumed innocent, and then throw your ass in jail and wait until you can prove that you're not a danger to yourself or society. Even John Mitchell, who probably wasn't the greatest liberal judge or lawyer or legal scholar in the world at that time, said the American public would never go for what they called preventive detention. Let's keep somebody in jail just in case he might hurt somebody and prevent him from hurting people until we determine what to do with him. So the other thing that changed along with that was the idea of the concept of what a crime was and how we measure crime. Now, I studied criminology. I was a criminologist before I went to law school. I did graduate work in criminology, and the main problem of criminology is to define what a crime is. But we don't do that anymore. We let the newspapers do that, and the newspapers do that by a measure of outrage, and the government does it by marketing fear. So what you've got now is you've got a whole system under the bond reform, mainly it started under Reagan, that you assess whether or not somebody's going to be a risk to the community or a risk to somebody in the community. And if they are, you hold them there until they learn their lesson or until they're no longer a risk or until they die of old age or whatever may be the case. So we can go back to the Johnson years and before that. What would happen is a person would commit a crime and the lawyers, prosecutors, judges, juries, etc., would try to figure out if this was a bad person or not a bad person. And that took a lot of subtle, I don't know what you would call it, guessing, I suppose. But what you did is you, under theological reasons, you determined what the person's soul was. Now that there was a different concept, a different view, and that was based on Roman law, which later became Napoleonic Code. And I think when I teach, I use the example of the Victor Hugo novel, Les Miserables. And in that novel, a guy stole a loaf of bread because his nephews and nieces were starving. So it was under common law a matter of necessity. That doesn't matter under Napoleonic Code. It doesn't matter whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. If you break the law, you should get punished because the law is just for punishment and protection, etc. And it's to make sure that power stays in the power of the nobleman and not in the peasantry. But since we've turned into peasant, they want to put us in our place and keep us in our place, and that's why they've changed this rule. Aside from which, it's very hard to determine what somebody's soul is like or what somebody's pretensions or predispositions are. And it's easier to measure an act. The Druids invented this, actually. If somebody falls out of a tree, you chop the tree down, you don't have to worry about him falling out again, and you punish the tree for injuring a person. That's sort of the way the law is now. A really good example of that is recently in Colorado, this Hispanic truck driver in a faulty truck ran into some people that were in a traffic jam and killed a few of them. And they punished him for reckless endangerment, murder, and crap like that, and gave him 100 years. Now, I'll tell you right now, if I got out of law school and I had a lawyer working for me that felt that way, his ass would be back digging ditches or something like that. That's not law, that's administration, and if you can't figure out how to dispense justice, then you shouldn't be in a judicial position. And when I lecture on subjects like this over the last 40 or 50 years, I used to bring out the example of Germany. Every Jew that they sent to the oven got there by way of a valid court writ signed by a judge, sworn in judge, member of the judiciary, who ordered the person to be deported to the camp. And now that's the same way with this judge in Jefferson County was. He's not a judge, he's an administrator. And administrators have no business getting the kind of money, nor do they have to make the decisions, the tough decisions that that they should have to make. I remember when the federal sentencing guidelines came out, where you had this matrix and you fill in a box and you take a calculator and you add up certain points, and you say, oh, that's a 3.2 year sentence, that's a 6.8 year sentence, etc. And this is for the judges to follow. Well, I made myself real popular with the judiciary with an editorial I wrote in one of the publications I was writing for then. Essentially I said, why do we pay these judges all this money and all these fancy salaries when any idiot with an adding machine can sentence somebody? You don't have to make a decision. You just add up the numbers and do the same thing. Later on, we're going to get into algorithmic sentencing and things like that, but not now. So you've got a whole bunch of reform people talking about how do we reform, uh, what kind of reforms do we need, how can we be more fair, but nobody's really looking back far enough to notice that we have a whole new system and a whole new purpose. Uh, the government got into selling protection years ago and it made a lot of money for a lot of people. So they're not going to give it up voluntarily. And as long as they keep the people ignorant that it's the government's job to protect them and to make sure others don't get them or get to them, they can rip us off exponentially over the next several hundred years and nobody will know any difference because we're promoting ignorance instead of education and no understanding of how the system works or why. Uh, I can give all kinds of examples. I'll just give one I can think of off the top of my head. Uh, One reason that we don't have a common law system is we don't have common symbols. We don't have common language that is needed for a common law system. So different people look at things differently. And what happens then is the power defined crime isn't defined by the society or by the people. It's defined by people in power like prosecutors. So go back to the bus driver. Who decided the guy should get 105 years? Well, the legislature said with its adding machine mentality, if you do this, 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 and this, and convict people of those things, and the total is that, then this is what that becomes the sentence. Whether it's logical or not, but you can justify it mathematically and ignorantly and get away with it because nobody really questions that. So who makes that decision? Is it the jury? Is it the people? Is it the public? No, it's it's the prosecutor's office, and the prosecutor decides to what charges to bring, and adds up the point, and then they can say, well, if I bring this, this, that, and the other, I can get this guy sentenced to 110 years. And it reminds me of a case I had against a prominent DA once in New Orleans, where there was obviously an illegal search. And I was discussing the case with him, and I said, well, assuming you can get all this evidence, how are you going to show who did what to whom? And the guy says, it doesn't matter. He says, I'll file the indictment, you file some motions, we'll have a suppression hearing. I'll lose the suppression hearing, the judge will suppress the evidence, and we can blame it on the judges, and neither one of us have to take the political heat. And that's sort of the way the system's going now. Nobody wants to make a decision because nobody wants to take responsibility. And it's just, we've got to cut through this quagmire and cut this Gordian knot, because otherwise we're going to be in bad, bad trouble. We're going to have a multilingual system without commonality, with a Napoleonic system in which nobody can agree to anything, leaving power in the few of mindless bureaucrats that all they can think about is getting reelected so they don't have to go to work. Now, if you want some more cynicism, I hope you'll become a subscriber and a watcher. And I promise you, I'll redo the introduction that I screwed up yesterday. And until then, and until we meet again, I need all the help, particularly at my age, getting some of this stuff out there. What I would like is any questions. I'll try to answer questions if you email me at dlblewett.gmail.com. I'd also like to get your feedback. I know I ramble sometimes. I just ad-lib a lot of this stuff. I'm trying to catch up. I'm trying to get as much stuff out there before I croak. And there's just a lot of comments that I'd really love to make. I'd like to stimulate some thought, and I think now is the time to do it when we're talking about reform. But if we're talking about reform, I want true reform and not just reform for the sake of reform and giving America business more chance to profit and to screw the little guy. So I will try to answer all inquiries. I will try to answer all emails. I really don't have that much else to do other than this, and this is a major project for me. So if you can promote my blog or my video, I would really appreciate it. Occasionally, if I have time and my machinery is working, I'll write something in my blog. What I plan to do is make a video, and then if I know a lot of times you'll feel my comments or analysis is faulty or bullshit even. I'll try to put as many backup documents in my blog post at Dennis Comments as I can to justify what I'm saying. One of the things we're going to do over the next year is I'm going to correlate drug policy with government policy and some funding ideas that I think we need to have happen. I don't think we can afford to let various agencies collect money to augment their own budgets. I think all money should start having to be turned into the general fund, and we'll take it from there. Thank you for watching, and you guys have a good evening. Bye.